This is a long form version of episode 19 talking about severity types. So the main one that we always think about, as we mentioned in the short form, is toxic. As you can see right here, we're just showing you sort of a generic toxic release, but toxic releases can happen from all types of incidents. They can happen from impacts, they can happen from scenarios that happen in the process. They can also be planned releases in terms of our flare stacks or our vent stacks and scrubbers. And sometimes we may have some issues with those where we have abnormalities from planned release stacks, and that goes into our toxic releases. So now as you're seeing a dispersion model to show, this is going to be a main factor that will help you in looking at toxic releases and how they impact personnel. And that is to say, hey, we're going to release a chemical at a certain pressure, at a certain height, and based on the chemical properties, we can map out how far is it going to go. You then want to then take a look at where a person is going to be as far as in that area or where it's stationed, or hey, is this going to impact a community? That's really helping us in the safety review to determine how much impact do we have from toxic releases. Obviously, a big thing in the toxic releases are going to be the chemical properties. So you want to look at the SDSs, you want to look at the information on the chemical itself to determine the magnitude of toxicity. Some things may be toxic to us over time for a chronic effect. You also want to compare that to, is this an acute toxic effect? Those are very different when we're talking about exposure rates, and you'll see that in the data that's provided. You can get this toxic data, as I mentioned, from SDSs or from government agencies online, like the Department of Energy. They have a lot of toxic information on different chemicals, and it'll really be able to help us to determine how is it impacting our employees and our community. Secondly, you want to look at explosions. This is something that we've really thought of recently, especially with the Beirut explosion. And the main thing that you want to focus on in explosions is that blast wave. Now, this is pretty common in our facility siting study, so if you have one at your site, you can take a look at that, and it shows the blast and who's stationed in that area. So when you're looking at that, there's two key factors. How heavily congested is the area, and there's a lot of people working in that congested area, or is this impacting a building where people could be stationed? Some inadvertent things that we don't think about sometimes, as you're seeing now with the video of an aftermath of an explosion, these buildings are completely toppled. So we may think, well, someone's in a building, they're going to be safe, they're going to be shielded from that. You want to really look at what blast force is coming from the release scenario, because this could blow the building down and hurt someone that's in the building. Sometimes we don't think about this, but a person out in the environment can actually be hit with a higher impact radius from a blast wave than someone who's in a building, because the building is going to topple at a lower rate. So that's a common factor we don't really know that much. And it's something to really think about when we're looking at these pressure waves coming from explosions that happen at our facilities. Lastly, we're looking at fires. You can see a fire here, and this is just showing one type of fire, but you can have multiple different types of fire depending on the chemical properties. Something that flashes or vaporizes very quickly, like say hydrogen coming out of a pipe, you're expecting to have a jet fire. So the thing you're thinking about a jet fire, is someone going to be there, or is that jet fire going to impinge on another piece of equipment and cause it to fail and maybe have a larger release? You also then have releases of flammable chemicals, which release over time and may create a large cloud. This will then happen to cause a flash fire if it finds an ignition source. Really, the thing you're going to be worried about here is a person going to be in that cloud and therefore are engulfed in that flash fire. And really, you're going to be looking at what are our electrical classifications, what are potential ignition sources that can impact our personnel there. Lastly, another common type of fire is a pool fire, and we all know about this, and sometimes pool fires lead to more catastrophic events like blevies or overpressures of our equipment. So in a pool fire scenario, you're going to be releasing a hazardous chemical that may have an evaporation rate. In a liquid form, it's going to pool on the ground, and if it finds an ignition source, it's going to start that fire on the top layer of the pool. You keep adding chemical to this fire, it's going to get bigger and it's going to be sustained. Where this really comes into play, obviously, if someone's standing in the pool fire, but as I mentioned, if this pool fire happens under another piece of equipment that has chemicals in it, this really can become a really dangerous chain reaction scenario. That's the long form content talking about severity types, just giving you a couple of examples there. Keep checking us out on the website, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook.